Hey there, happy Friday everyone. Welcome to Designing XD. I'm Ainsley Wagoner. I'm a senior designer here at Adobe on the Adobe Xd team. And I'm going to talk to you all today about how to talk about design. So I work here at on Xd, and things that I've designed in the past are features like responsive resize. And then this past year, I've been working on some features that will launch with Max, so I can't talk about them yet. But one of my sort of side interests at Adobe and as a designer in general is how we present our work and how we talk about our work and how we critique our work. Hi, everyone on the live stream. Hi, Justin and Julia and Anissa. It's really great to have you all today. I'm interested to hear your all's feedback about this topic and your experiences presenting your work. So this topic is close to my heart because I went to architecture school, I went to design school, and we had critiques. We would show our work in class to our professors informally, and then we would have big formal presentations where we would show our work. And at each stage of showing your work, the feedback that you would get from your peers, from your professors, and then from maybe the visiting faculty or visiting professors that would come to the formal reviews, all of that feedback would help you make your work better, right? And maybe some of you work by yourselves, right? As freelancers or from home, and it's just you. And that can be really challenging because one of the things that is really helpful as a designer is getting somebody else's eyes on it and getting someone else's feedback. So when you are in a team setting or you're in a setting where you sort of assemble your own team, making sure that you're getting good feedback about your work is a really important way to progress that work, right? However, I wonder if anyone else has had the experience of maybe having a bad critique or having a bad review. And when I say bad, I mean you go into the review and the feedback you get is not very helpful, and you feel like the conversation wasn't what you wanted it to be. So that's the moment that I'm actually really interested in, is how we can make sure that when we are sharing our work, whether that's with peers online or at your desk or in a formal setting, that those are moments where you can learn and grow. So I actually just put together a talk about this. I was last week in Toronto at Ladders Conference, and it was a really neat conference full of designers who were leveling up from junior to mid-level in their career. And one of the things that they wanted to talk about was presenting your work. So I thought I'll put together kind of a synthesis of this talk and really go through it. So let's talk about it. I see that Eric, you always give people nice reviews. That's great. That it's a compliment sandwich is always really good. So say something that's successful about the design, say something that could be improved, and then say another thing that is nice about it. So that's really helpful. But being nice isn't the only way to have a successful review, right? Because I don't know if you all know that feeling of when you show somebody your work and they say, "It looks great," and you're like, "Thank you, but also I need help with it. I am a little bit stuck and I don't know where to go from here." So being able to give critical feedback is really helpful. So what I'm going to talk to you all about today is actually how to, from the perspective of the presenting designer, how to make sure that you are helping people give you the right feedback. So a lot of that responsibility is on us as presenting designers to clarify what type of feedback you would like. So again, welcome to the live stream. Thanks for those of you who are joining us. Hi, Tim. Hi, Maggie. We're talking about how to talk about design. So first up, what are the reasons we are presenting our work? There's times where you want feedback, as I'm talking about. There's times when you're presenting and you want to communicate a new pattern. So maybe there's something that has been finalized in your design work and you want to kind of share that around and let people know this is the new way we're doing things. Or there's a type of presentation where you're getting approval. So you're hoping to finalize the design. And then within a presentation, there's a couple of variables that you're working with, right? You have that these things will change the way you present your work. So we're going to talk about all of these. There's the variable of the audience. So like I said, you could be presenting to your peers. For us on the Adobe Xd design team, there's a group of us that are all just designers together. Senior designers, experienced designers, like all of us have a similar title. And so we present our work to each other, both informally, just like at our desks, or if it's a remote teammate, we'll throw it up in a Slack channel and throw images. And then there's a presentation format where we're presenting to each other. And then there's, of course, there's a presentation style there's an audience rather, that's internal stakeholders. So it's other people who are involved in your project but aren't necessarily designers. So when I'm presenting to a group of maybe product managers and engineers or managers, design managers, researchers, that would be that's what I would call an internal stakeholder audience. Then we have external stakeholders. So those of you who work at agencies or as a freelancer and you're presenting to somebody who's outside of your company, and there's a different way that you would present to them. And then there's an audience that is what I like to call bosses. So these are people who are the gatekeepers of approval for whether or not your work moves forward and is built. So those are different types of audiences you could present to. Okay, I did my slides sort of out of order, but let me just go back and say, these are the variables of your presentation: audience, type of design, and design stage. And then they influence the type of context you're going to set for your presentation and the feedback that you're going to ask for. So I already talked about types of audience. The type of feedback, here's a variable that you're playing with when you're presenting your work. You could be asking for lots of different types of feedback. And I think this is actually something that's really important to hone in on as designers. When you are presenting your work, it's important to ask directly for a type of feedback. So there is workflow feedback. So this is early in your work. You would show something and you would want people to tell you if that workflow made sense overall, if it matched their expectations for how a feature might work. Then there's visual design feedback. That one's pretty straightforward. Does this look as crisp and sharp and perfect as it can look? There's pattern consistency feedback. So this is something that we look at a lot on XD because there's many of us designers working on the product and we're working on different little pieces of that product. And there's a lot of different choices you can make and UI elements you can use that would give you the same result. For instance, if I wanted to get pattern feedback about something where I'm making a yes or no choice, there's a lot of ways you could do that. You could have a toggle button, you could have a radio button, you could have a checkbox, you could have a drop-down menu with 2 options, right? But the question is, how have my teammates and the people who've worked on the product before me, how have they made those choices before. So in XD, we try to avoid checkboxes if possible, or go to a toggle button model. So we have a lot of checkboxes, but there's also, we have a lot of on-off buttons. For instance, on responsive resize, we made a toggle choice. On a lot of the border alignment properties, those are toggle buttons, right, instead of checkboxes. So that's an example of pattern consistency feedback, where you might be presenting a feature or a project and you want to know how people have done it before you, and you want to make sure you're staying consistent. And then the last type of feedback you might be asking for is edge cases. And I find that my engineering colleagues are really great at helping me with this type of feedback, because they're really good at thinking ahead and thinking through edge cases. So when you're presenting work, you are asking people to help you think of those edge cases. Where will this break? And that's something you want to know as a designer. Another variable about presentations is your design stage. So your presentation is going to change based on whether you're presenting really early work, or it's kind of in the middle of several iterations that you're doing, or it's late stage work that you're trying to get approved. Okay, so those three variables that I just talked about, audience, feedback, and design stage, all influence these next two things, these next two items, which are context and visual fidelity. So context is the context that you give for people before you present your work. So it's really tempting as designers to work on your screens. For me, it's in Adobe Xd, and we present our work in Adobe Xd as well. So it's very tempting to work on your designs and get them pixel perfect right up until the last minute, and not take any time to step back and think about what someone new coming into this project might need to know to understand that work. That's really important. I think that's also a relatable experience. I wonder if any of you have gone into a design review and maybe you missed the beginning of it, or maybe it's just work you've never seen before and you totally don't understand what's going on because you don't have context. So it's really important as people who are presenting work to set context, and there's a couple of ways we can do that. We can talk about the history of the project. So you can say, this was something that I started last year, but we ran out of time and now we're picking it back up again. A really important thing for context always is stating the user problem. I think sometimes we can take for granted that we're working on what we're working on and here's the solution, but sometimes people who are new to the situation and new to your work have not yet had that user problem broken down for them. So they need to know why you're doing the work that you're doing. Also, helpful context is, are there any dependencies? So does what you're working on, is that going to depend on some other design work that's shipping at the same time? Or does it depend on some engineering, architectural restructuring that you're waiting on? What are the things that this work that you're showing is connected to? That's important context for people to understand why you've made the choices you've made. And then finally, the deadlines. That's an important thing to tell people. So if you're presenting work and it's kind of due next week, they will give you different feedback if this work is slated for next year, right? And then lastly, another thing that changes for your presentation and according to the variables is the fidelity at which you present your work. So this one's pretty straightforward, and I'll show some examples of this, but there's different fidelities at which you can show your work. You can show really low fidelity wireframes, you can show kind of mid fidelity, or you can show pixel perfect high fidelity work. And all of those choices change the type of feedback you can get, and it changes according to the presentation you're giving. So what's next? Oh, here are some examples of fidelity. So let's look at these. So this is a good example of a really low fidelity wireframe that I would show if I'm just trying to communicate an overall idea. So it's a wireframe, it's boxes. This is a Xd, let's say, but it could be other things too, right? But this is an app. You have a toolbar and the top bar, some things in the sidebar, and the canvas. But the important thing here is that I would string together a lot of these to show a basic user journey through a new feature or through a basic experience that I'm trying to communicate. And showing low fidelity stuff is really helpful if you're trying to have a conversation at a high level about a feature. I'm going to go back to that other slide, but this is mid fidelity. So this is actually taken from an Xd UI kit that is available on Behance that was made by my design colleague Sam, who you all know if you watch the live stream. Sam hosts sometimes, Sam Anderson. He made a really cool wireframe kit that we used to mock up our initial ideas for Xd. And what it does is it speaks to where things are in Xd. This is all accurate. These are all the pieces and parts of our app. Yeah, Justin knows Sam. And it lets me zoom in on certain areas and be high fidelity in those places where I'm trying to focus my presentation. So this is an example I mocked up very quickly of a project that I did last year that has shipped, so I can talk about it, for responsive resize. So in this case, I have kind of a high fidelity thing on canvas. So this is actually how the selection box would look and how my artboard might look. And then this particular section in the property inspector for responsive resize is high fidelity, but everything else about this is mid fidelity, because what I'm trying to do is say, don't look at this. Don't look at these things, focus on these things, and let's talk about those things. But also, this is relatively how it would fit in, and this is Xd. And then here is, I know it looks like I'm showing just Xd, but this is a designed screen that I have that I work with that's the highest fidelity rendering of Xd, and this is where I would place my work. Okay, so I think let's walk through an example of this. Hi, Sam. We were just talking about Sam's. Welcome to the live stream. Welcome to Adobe Live. Happy Friday. So we are talking about how to talk about design and how to present your work and what are really helpful ways to make sure that you have a great presentation. And I talked about a lot of different variables for that. And now I'm going to combine some of those variables and let's put together an example. And I'll keep using responsive resize as as my example project that I'm presenting. So this is very early in the project, and I am presenting it to a mixed group of stakeholders. So let's say this is the first time I'm showing this work to other people, and the people I'm showing it to are designers, product managers, engineers, and maybe some design managers too. So what I would want to do in this case is definitely set some context. Now, wrote this roughly. I made these statistics up, and I'm sort of, this is not accurate information. I'm writing this really quickly as an example. But here is a slide I would put before my work so that my audience had the context. So I would say, all right, what's our user problem? Users want to quickly resize their designs for different screen sizes without manually tweaking every element. So that's true. That is why we wanted to add responsive resize, because we had a hunch that a lot of the times when people are resizing a group of elements, maybe to a larger artboard, they want things to stay fixed left and fixed right and center most of the time. So that was our user problem that we were solving. So that's what I want to say when I set up my work. Next, a good piece of context to set, and it's good to have all of this information on a slide, but you would want to quote research, right? Research is really helpful, and a lot of people in the room like to hear statistics about why you're doing this. So this is I made this statistic up about research, but it sells it, right? I made it up for the sake of talking to you today, but getting real research is important. So let's say research shows 80% of the time, the desired behavior for resizing elements is to maintain aspect ratio. That's helpful. And then I think those of you who use our product know that we look at user voice. And so this is something that really matters to our product managers. And this is really helpful context to set up for other product managers and designers in the room, because if something has a lot of upvotes on user voice, where our users and our customers have gone in and they've said specifically, we really want this thing, then we see that and we hear that and we prioritize that. That's important to us. Thank you, Tim, for posting the user voice link. So quoting those statistics are helpful for people. And this last line, I have a little bit of history of the project. This is also, I'm sort of making this up, but that is a real thing that would happen, where you would give people the context that this is work that you're picking up again, or in any combination of history. So once you give context for your work, that shouldn't take very long. It certainly wouldn't take as long as it did for me to just kind of go through them, but maybe like a minute max, and then everybody in the room is on the same page as you and has the same understanding of the work, so can see the work in the way that you need them to. Then you can ask for the type of feedback that you would want. So going back to this example that we're using, I am showing early work and I'm showing it to a mixed group of stakeholders. Now, I personally think this is a very delicate time to show your work to anybody except designers, because it's really easy when you show design work, especially early stage work, for people to get carried away and comment on something other than the main ideas that you're trying to talk about. So it's important to state very clearly that the type of feedback that you want is workflow feedback, and say, I'm in the exploration phase. This is really early work. I just want to talk about the overall workflow, and does this make sense? And the subtext there, or you can be explicit, but I don't want to talk about the visual design. I don't want to talk about the icon choices, right? That's what we're saying there. You're just letting people know the type of conversation you want to have. And then you might also say, I already want to know, even early on, what type of product dependencies there are. I'm sorry if that's jargony, but really it's just saying, if there's people in the room who know that the work I'm doing could conflict with work that they're doing that I'm maybe not aware of, please let me know now, so that I don't make something that winds up being a bigger conflict later. So let me actually at this point kind of zoom out to my canvas. So here I am in Xd, and we've set up the context and we've set up the type of feedback we want. So I will just show you about the amount and the type of work I would show. So this is really fun because now I get to just jump into Xd. But this is for real, like an old file of mine where I would present the workflows for the responsive resize project. But this down here is actually what I want to show you. So let's focus on this group of artboards. Now, this is about the amount of work I would show. So this many slides, this many screens, walking through 2 main workflows. And maybe even less. I know that there's been a lot of great Adobe Live sessions where people walk through designing a feature really quickly. Talon is great at this. My colleague Alex is great at this. Sam, Hillary, all of my colleagues are really good at communicating design ideas in just a few screens. So even just showing maybe one workflow can really let you have the conversation that you want to have. But let's say you have 2 main ideas that you want to show. This is about the amount of artboards. I think my head's kind of on top of one, but this is about the amount of work I would show at this stage. Now, let's look at the fidelity. This is about the fidelity I would show it at. So again, we looked at this just a second ago, but I have my wireframe that Sam Anderson designed that you all can download on Behance to design your own feature in Adobe Xd. And I have just the real estate that I'm going to be adding to with my new feature. I have just those things are in high fidelity and in color because I want to focus people's attention on what I'm trying to communicate about the way the basic responsive resize workflow will work. So this is the fidelity at which I would show early work to a mixed group of stakeholders. One big difference here between maybe showing this to only designers is I would want to stamp WIP on everything, because what might happen is somebody shares your work without you being there, or just maybe somebody comes in late and you want to make sure that everyone knows that this is a work in progress, this is not final work, don't get worried. And then another thing you might do I'm saying this particularly for work that you're presenting to a mixed group of stakeholders, so product managers and engineers. I think it's helpful to write things like FPO, which stands for placement only, anywhere that there's assets that aren't final. So this is actually ultimately what this became. But oh yeah, see, I'm missing my little toggle here. So this communicates to everyone that these assets are not final. So we don't need to have a conversation about whether or not this is the right icon, etc. Justin, yes. It's helpful. It just stamp things with work in progress. Okay, so that is my version of how to set up your work, to give context for what you're going to show, to tell people what kind of feedback you want, and the fidelity at which to show your work so that you can have the best conversation about your work that you can have. Because as designers, what we have to do a lot of the time is be our own facilitators and facilitate the conversation we want to have so that we make sure that we're making our work better. So thank you all so much for joining and listening and being here with me on Friday. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. See you next time.